applicants in Medina.
Good morning. I call to order the rescheduled June meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee at the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone joining us in the Campus View room. Just as a reminder, while today's meeting is not being live streamed, the recording will be uploaded and archived to the board's YouTube channel after today's meeting. Let me also start by welcoming our student representative today, Ethan Ellis, from the Twin Cities campus. First item on the agenda this morning is an update on the internal audit activities that have resulted since our February meeting. So Chief Auditor Galswick, would you please begin?
Thank you, Chair Verhalen and members of the committee. The internal update begins on page 3 of your document materials. As a reminder, this is the update on the work that we've completed since February. The second agenda item today will be the annual audit plan, which will include an overview of the work completed for the entire fiscal year. To begin with, the internal audit summary is on page 4. We made substantial progress on our Tier 1 audits this period. However, we continue to work through staffing constraints, which impacted our audit work completion. When fully staffed, we have 16 auditors in addition to myself. Since December, we've had 2 retirements and 3 staff departures. We've also had 5 auditors that have been on extended leave, either parental or medical. So in April, we hired an experienced IT auditor, and this month we hired 2 new staff financial auditors. And we'll continue to look to hire that remaining open position once we've more fully onboarded the people that we've just recently brought on. I'll discuss the impacts of the staffing issues as part of the broader audit plan discussion in the next agenda item. Follow-up results on outstanding essential items are detailed on page 6 and page 7 of your docket. The remediation rate for outstanding high-risk items was 30%. This is better than the February results, but there is still a large number of items outstanding, and this rate is still slightly below the 3-year running average. However, of the 98 unresolved items, 75 are still within the first year of follow-up, and about 1/3 are from new audits receiving first-time follow-up. Also, only 28% of the outstanding items are past due. So overall, I continue to believe the administration is making concerted efforts to address these issues in a sustainable manner. However, given the large number of high-risk items currently open, and new audit reports being issued that contain a large number of high-risk items, ongoing attention from the administration will be needed to ensure items are remediated in a timely manner. There's one audit, the Bell Museum, that has one high-risk item that has been open for 2 years. That's detailed on page 7 of your document material. This is related to completing a valuation of their collection for insurance purposes and other reasons. These efforts continue to be delayed in part by facility-related issues that they're working with facilities management to resolve. 2 audits remediated all remaining high-risk items this period, UMD Athletics and the Morris campus. We always like to give a shout out to those units as a lot of work goes into addressing all those items. But I want to especially call out the Morris campus in particular because they closed 11 open high-risk items, a number of those being in IT this period alone. In the June internal audit update, we also include the completion of recommendations by audit report fiscal year. That's on page 8 of your document material. This schedule shows the timelines of high-risk audit report items remediation. It's designed to illustrate the frequency of high-risk issues taking over a year and especially over 2 years to resolve. As I've told the committee many times, it's important to note that not all high-risk items are created equal. Some are straightforward and quick to address, and occasionally management's remediation plans are even designed to be greater than a year. But this schedule does demonstrate a reduction in the items taking longer than 2 years to remediate since fiscal year 2022. However, there's a risk to see that going up given the large number of FY24 audit reports with high-risk items still outstanding. Audit activity on page 9 of your docket shows a summary of our work over the last 4 months. This includes completion of 7 audits. 3 of those are standard audits and 4 are transition reviews. Of the standard audit reports completed, 1 report was rated as adequate and 2 reports were rated as needs improvement. The adequate audit report was purchasing services, travel, and expense. We found many strong institutional policies and controls exist, especially given the hundreds of thousands of transactions that purchasing deals with every year. But there's heavy reliance placed on units finance teams throughout the university, and additional governance and monitoring would be helpful. In addition, there are some improvements that the report recommends related to the applications used for processing, purchasing, and expense transactions. The UMD audit report was a needs improvement report. It's important to note that this audit reviewed back office administrative processes and is not reflective of UMPD's tactical policing practices, which are reviewed separately by external agencies who found no significant findings in their most recent reviews. However, there are several administrative processes that need attention. These include improving some evidence and inventory management procedures, ensuring system controls require officers' time cards to be approved by independent individuals, and that rest and recuperation standards are met with officers even when they're working voluntary overtime. We also recommend that UMPD works with other university units to improve the university's active threat and emergency response training. The report includes other background information for the consideration. This includes information on UMPD staffing that may be of interest. The Crookston campus was also rated as needs improvement. We found leadership is committed to improving internal controls, but administrative staffing levels result in many employees serving in multiple roles and a more reactive than proactive control environment, relying in some cases on manual processes. Issues were identified across several areas, including in IT, athletics, contract management, payroll processes, management of some key controls in areas such as the daycare center, and academic administration. This includes ensuring sufficient controls are in place to prevent ghost students, which has been a type of fraud that you probably have read about and that has increased in frequency throughout the United States. We also recommend that Crookston reviews longstanding programs of providing regional phone service, including 911 services to the broader community through its data center and its student laptop program. Last item to highlight in your docket is the remediation plans referencing peak on page 16. This is a schedule requested by the committee and shows all audit reports where management action plans have referenced peak to address issues identified in the audit reports. There was one additional item added this period from the Crookston audit. With that, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I stand for any questions that you may have.
Yeah, we'll go to region questions in a second, but first wanted to thank you, Chief Auditor Galswick, and your team. I know that there have been some challenges in staffing, especially with the retirements and departures that you mentioned, in addition to a few other items, and really appreciate the continued attention by you and your staff to make sure that we are getting our audits done as they need to be done and reporting on its status regularly. So thank you. Any questions or comments from regions? While this was a summary report, every regent receives the detailed report. So not just the audit committee, but every regent receives a copy of those reports. And Chief Auditor Galswick's door is always open if there are immediate questions that come from reviewing those reports as they come in. All right. Thank you so much. So our second item of business is to review and act on the internal audit plan for this next fiscal year. I will turn again to Chief Auditor Galswick to outline the plan for us.
All right, thank you, Chair Verheulen, members of the committee. So as I mentioned in my first item, the first one was discussing the audit period. So from February to today, this is really discussing all the work that we've done over the last fiscal year and the work that we plan to do next fiscal year. So in this presentation, I'll talk through the FY 2026 audit results, the process that we go through for developing the FY 27 audit plan, and then I'll provide some other additional information about operational duties and communications that I'm required to provide to the audit committee as part of Institute of Internal Auditors standards. So for the 2026 audit results, we had 19 standard audits and full transition reviews that we completed. 79% of those had satisfactory results, either rated as adequate or good. 21% were rated as needs improvement. This is a slight decrease in the number of needs improvement compared to FY25, but it is somewhat higher than it has been historically. I think that somewhat higher findings of needs improvement in our audit reports reflects in part the audits that we're selecting to review, through our risk assessments, et cetera, but also the continual strain on administration to ensure that we have the proper controls and processes in place, as I've discussed with the committee in the past. The results, I believe, still continue to demonstrate an overall culture of compliance and risk management, though. I think that's important to know. There are also 8 audits that are still in progress that we expect to complete in FY 2027. That is higher than we would typically like, and we're not as far along on those audits as we typically would like, again, in large part related to the staffing constraints. It's also important to note, of those 19 standard audits that we've completed, there's 3 of them where the report has not yet been issued. The audit work is all done. We're working through the reporting phase right now with management, and you'll see those in the coming weeks. We also worked on 10 investigations, and we worked on a number of special projects. 2 to highlight is the annual gift testing. That we do this work in alignment with the Memorandum of Understanding with the University of Minnesota Foundation, where we look to ensure that a sample of transactions are in alignment with donor intent. We also looked at Special Olympics preparedness, making sure that we have the proper contracts in place, and we were preparing for this event that's currently wrapping up, I believe, today on campus. There was no issues identified with that. So for allocation of resources, so when we're thinking about building our audit plan, we start with how much time do we have and how do we work through the hours that we can allocate. We pull out the overhead. That is the 21.5% is really the areas of vacation, sick time, et cetera, university policy for the most part that we have to pull out for every individual. Then we have internal operations. So this is some of our management of our internal software, our management, HR functions, those types of things. And then the green area is really the work in which we're able to do focused on our audit charter and the work that we expect to complete on behalf of the committee. This year, you'll see that in the area of risk analysis process improvement, we're budgeting a little bit more time in that area. We also spent a little bit more time in that area than we expected last year. For last year, part of that is related to staffing again, and just fewer people to spread some of that work across. Those percentages go up. But next year, part of the reason why that number is higher is because we were planning on implementing a new automated work paper system. So the current system that we use is quite old with limited functionality, and we've received notification from the vendor that it's likely to no longer be supported in the future. We're moving to a new software that's used by a few of our Big Ten peers, and we're pretty excited about the functionality that it should be able to provide for us, as well as it's a software as a service that has a high level of security that's been approved by our information security group to handle some of our most sensitive data, including HIPAA. But that will take some additional time going forward. So for development of the audit plan, I won't go through everything on this slide, but a couple of things to highlight. It's part of the information gathering process that we meet with institutional leaders, and I make myself personally available to every board member if you would like to discuss your thoughts on risk or particular audits or areas that you would like us to consider adding into the audit plan. This year we met with 113 different individuals across 56 units. We also do a broad risk analysis where we pull information from other universities, from federal regulators to see where their focus is, et cetera, to make sure that we're hitting the right areas. For communicating out this audit plan, we discussed this with senior leaders. I met with committee leadership as well to provide a draft of this plan before I brought it to you today. And today we're reviewing it, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but this is the review process that will then go to the full board meeting for final approval. So some key themes identified. These are pretty much the same as last year in all of these meetings that we had. I will say the parentheticals have changed a little bit. There's some additional focus on things like artificial intelligence. The impacts of the budget cuts were top of mind for more of the individuals that we met with this year. And again, the government/regulatory volatility remains a high risk and a moving target for everyone. From a unit audit universe, so we think about our audit world in 2 different ways: unit audits and process audits. Unit audits are our bread and butter, what we've done for many, many years. We roll up all of the DEPT IDs, so all of the individual accounting codes for every activity that happens within this institution rolls up into one of these 176 units that we consider to be our auditable units. We then do an analysis based upon the information we receive, based upon some data analytics that we do to come up with a risk assessment of where we think we have some particularly high risk units or low risk units. We ultimately had 24 high risk units this period, 118 moderate, and 34 low. It's important to note all of these are about inherent risk, not residual risk. So we're thinking about this by the nature of the work in which they do. So for example, athletics will always be in the high risk, just by the nature of the work in which they do, no matter how great the controls are in place. So for deploying our audit resources, again, we break it between unit and process audits, where, again, the unit is the individual auditable unit that rolls up from all those FIDs. A process audit is more cross-unit. Oftentimes, it's about a particular policy, particular control area, et cetera. We make sure that when we're deploying our audit resources that we have good coverage of the various organizational components, that we're aligning to the institutional risks in areas of strategic priority. And we make sure that we save some time for special projects if there's additional board requests or requests from the administration for us to look at something. We also break our audit plan into two tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2 prioritization. I want to make it clear to the committee that the expectation is that we will complete all of the audits on the audit plan. However, if we were to have additional staffing constraints, or if there were suddenly some audits that were more urgent or emerging risks that we need to address, the Tier 2 would be the audits that we would first look to swap out, which we're allowed to do by board policy by just communicating that to the committee, while Tier 1 would actually have to come back to the board for approval. So for our audit plan, so for my unit audits, we have 10 unit audits that we are planning on doing this year. I won't go through all of these in detail. A couple I will highlight, though, is the Public Safety Emergency Communications Center, PSEC. This is a division of the Department of Public Safety, which rolls up, which UMPD rolls up to, but it is a separate entity. They handle the cameras and the door access and those things. So we are doing that audit. This year we did UMPD, which I just spoke about in FY26. The first bullet there on the moderate risk side, the CBS, BMBB, GCD, that is a unit that is actually located both in the College of Biological Sciences and in the med school. It's a kind of a dual department. So just an important thing to highlight there. CSE IT was a deferred audit from FY26 that I communicated to the committee in February that we would defer. And the Office of Public Engagement is a department that is in the Provost's office. We have not audited that unit at that level before, but we've reviewed some of the centers that roll up to it. And the UROC Research Outreach Center in North Minneapolis was on the FY26 plan, and we're going to roll some of that work into this and do a bit of a broader review of the Office of Public Engagement. There are two process audits that we have listed for FY 2027. IT software purchasing will be a review that involves the purchasing department, the purchasing department, IT, information security, and likely even OGC, as we're thinking through all the processes people go through when we're bringing in software throughout the institution. Athletic select processes, we typically try to do an audit in athletics every year, again, given the risk in that area. We're leaving this a little broad this year because it is a particularly moving target over the last couple of years. I expect that this will be a review of work associated with house payments, but I don't know what those will look like 6 months from now.
The house settlement payments.
Excuse me. The house settlement payments and how we're complying with the rules associated with that. But given some of the legislation that is being discussed, et cetera, I don't know if those processes will remain intact and be auditable this year. But we will look at something within athletics. Something to note on this audit plan, between these two, there's a total of 12 audits on this audit plan. That is a reduction from previous years, and again, is reflective of we have additional carried forward audit that we're going to have to be doing this year. All right, so this is quite small on your slide, but this is our mapping out to the institutional risk profile. As a reminder to the committee, the institutional risk profile was last reviewed by the committee in September of 2024. The expectation is that it will be brought back to the committee this fiscal year. And I know the ERM team and others are working to pull that together. But what we're trying to do here is really try to show that our audits are mapping out to those risks and that we're getting coverage. And over the last few years, we've had coverage across most of these major components. The other way, as I mentioned before, that we slice our audit plan is we look at the coverage of the major components of the institution. So this is just another way of looking at it. where, the majority of our time is in the provost academic area, but we're making sure that we have time in IT, in system campuses, et cetera. So the FY 2027 audit plan, for my professional opinion, provides reasonable audit coverage across all major university components. It addresses key risks currently impacting the university and those identified by the board and senior leadership. And I believe it provides flexibility for us to address emerging risks as they may arise. As I mentioned before, the next steps, the audit plan will recommend the audit plan will be recommended out of the Audit and Compliance Committee for board action. Any changes to Tier 1, I will need to communicate to both the committee, and that would require board approval, while changes to Tier 2, we can make those adjustments within committee, and I would provide those in my internal audit update. Other communications, most of these are things that I'm required to tell you by Institute of Internal Auditor standards, but also just for your continued oversight from the functional oversight responsibilities of the internal audit department. Our internal audit budget and resources to begin with. We have, just so you're aware, we have ran at a structural deficit for many years, since I believe 2009. We are able to make that work in large part because of the staffing turnover. So you end up with having salary savings as staff turnover, and that's allowed us to build a carry forward balance. So we have cushion in order to be able to weather several years at this point if we were to be fully staffed. However, it is important for the committee to know that if we did remain fully staffed for several years, we would have to address that budget shortfall. And I provide some additional details on this to committee leadership. In addition, I mentioned the automated work paper system, so we're going to be upgrading that this year. There is some additional cost to that. It's relatively minor. I believe that the additional cost will be about $12,000 or $18,000 a year over what we're currently paying. But there will be a one-time cost up front. Other communications to note here, in fiscal year 2026, there were no scope limitations or impairments to independence, and we've identified no significant omissions or errors in our reports. For reporting on non-audit duties in which I have been assigned, the duties listed here have been assigned to me directly by the board, specifically the Institutional Conflict Review Panel and the Presidential Conflict Review Panel. It's just important for the committee to know that if you ever wanted an audit review of that decision-making process of that panel, we would have to bring in an outside auditing firm to do that. Me and my department would still be able to, my department would still be able to audit compliance with those individual plans, et cetera, but you couldn't have us review ourselves. I think these duties being assigned to me is appropriate, but you just need to be aware of that. And with that, I stand for any questions that you may have.
Yeah, so before we move on to questions, we'll take a motion and second on the plan, so then we can have a discussion. So as noted in the docket, any amendments to Tier 1 audits of the internal audit plan will return to us for review and action. Any other changes will be reported to us. With that, is there a motion to recommend approval of the fiscal year 2027 internal audit plan?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. With that, let's turn to discussion. One item that I just wanted to circle back on with the automated work papers. The development of work papers for audit is an incredibly time-intensive process, and you can't just use one work paper across every audit you're doing. They do have to be individualized and developed for purposes of what you're going to be heading into. I would envision that while the automated process will have, that run rate, the software fee associated with it, as you mentioned, it has the security protocols in place. It is used by our peers, so it is being developed for purposes of auditing within higher education versus trying to take something from the private sector, for example, and modify it. So as that process and as the familiarity with that software gets underway, there will be individualized efficiencies likely in being able to pull from those databases of existing work papers, prior year work papers, however they've been modified for different units.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Verhalen. A couple of things to note here. First, you're absolutely right that work papers, that's kind of a catch-all term that we use for all of our interview documentation, all of our testing, documentation, analysis, et cetera. And there are differences between how this may look in the private sector versus in higher education, in large part because we have a much broader risk landscape here at the university, but just if you consider all the various operations that we have that most private companies don't need to worry about. So one of the things that really did draw us to the software was by having a number of Big Ten peers who are using this software that provides us some additional, collective voice with the vendor, because frankly, what they need at the University of Illinois from their work paper system is not that different than what we need, but it's going to be quite a bit different than what a private company may need. The other piece related to looking for ongoing efficiencies, absolutely that will be built into the software. The other thing that we're planning on spending some time doing this year is really looking to try to leverage artificial intelligence more in our daily operations and how we are using that to document some of our interviews, do some of our data analytics as well. The software has some of those tools built in, but we think that there's a way that we're going to be able to leverage both what they provide and maybe some of the tools that are already being provided by the university in order to try to further that. So we're hopeful that we're going to continue to build some efficiencies both with this tool and with the other emerging technologies that are coming.
Yeah, and with the technologies we have access to already.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Any other discussion or questions?
I'll just ask a quick question. Risk is kind of a, right, it's an ever-changing and ever, as we see our peer institutions get into trouble in some way or shape or form on a risk that we didn't know we had, does that shoot to the top? I mean, so we check to make sure, and how do you compare like financial risk to environmental risk and health risk assessment, and so on?
Yeah, Regent Hips, Chair Verhalen. So first, I meet a couple of times a year with my peers throughout the Big Ten. And actually, I meet with other chief auditors from other research institutions as well. And one of the major things we do is talk about the risks that our campuses are seeing and things that maybe have caught other universities off guard. That helps me to inform the audit plan, to think about what has happened at a different institution, very likely could also happen here. Now, how do you compare that from, risk of, related to campus safety, for example, related to that, or compare that to a major fraud that occurred somewhere else? I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer, but some of it is based upon just professional judgment at the end of the day, where we have to take a step back and say, okay, where do we think based upon our environment that we think is actually the highest level of inherent risk or just warrants audit attention to make sure we have the proper controls in place.
I think that's really good. That reputational risk is really important for institutions like ours, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
especially for
you can get off the mark really fast. But if somebody can help you, some university makes a mistake on something, that's what we don't want to do, right? So
exactly. If somebody else has been in the newspaper for something, we want to avoid being in the newspaper for the same.
Right. Yeah. So.
Thoughts or questions?
I just want to thank Quinn and his team. There's a tremendous amount of work going on. We have a big, complicated, messy landscape. I know your team has been thin this past year, and you're really doing a marvelous job at raising up the risks and issues to us and then developing thoughtful plans with the teams. I know my teams across the university are working hard to develop the follow-up action management plans that are required, and your team is attentive there as well. So I just want to thank you for all your work, Quinn.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Chair Verhalen, I'll just say that I continue to appreciate that the administration is responsive to our audit reports and to our audit requests so that we can do our jobs. And so very, very much appreciate that. And that goes to you and to the entire administration. Thank you.
All right. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. So that brings us to our information items. Chief Auditor Gulswick, anything to highlight for us?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Verhalen. There are two information items today. The first is the annual report on institutional risk and financial reports. This report is required by board policy. It includes updates on the on the enterprise risk management assessments, application of insurance towards addressing risk throughout the institution, updates on active projects within the Office of Risk Management and Insurance, and an overview of financial controls and milestones that currently exist. The second information item is related to 2 engagements with the university's external auditor, Clifton Larson Allen. These are required to be reported to the committee by board operations and agenda guidelines. Neither of these engagements created an independence concern. That concludes my remarks, and I, or members of the administration who prepared these items, who are in attendance today, stand for any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions on the information items for Chief Auditor Gulswick? All right. Thank you for all of that. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.